Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 15th anniversary celebration for the Morgridge Center for Public Service. For those of you who are just joining us for the second half of our celebration, earlier this afternoon we really had a wonderful session with the rollout of the Wisconsin Without Borders initiative, our brand new partnership on campus between the Division of International Studies, the Global Health Institute, and the Morgridge Center for Public Service, and our effort to begin a new program on campus that is focused on international service learning. And we heard wonderful stories and events that the students were involved in with their service learning all around the world, and I just have to say how proud I am of the students and their faculty mentors for the wonderful work they're doing. Clearly it represents long-term investments, long-term partnerships that are formed based on long-term trust. So hopefully some of you heard that, and welcome to this afternoon session. For our next portion of our program, we're honored to hear perspectives about the role that civic engagement plays in higher education at the 5,000-foot level from Chancellor David Ward. We'll move on from there to hear about the perspectives about the founding of the Morgridge Center for Public Service from both John and Tasha Morgridge. And again, with this 15th year anniversary, we have much to be thankful for, and clearly we are all very thankful for John and Tasha's support over the years. We will conclude our afternoon program with our keynote address by speakers Bob and Sarah Rothschild, who will share with us their vision and experiences with their foundation initiative, Building Village Libraries in Botswana. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Interim Chancellor David Ward. Chancellor Ward returned to the helm as Chancellor at UW-Madison in July 2011, having previously served in the position between 1993 and 2000. Chancellor Ward has many, many accolades on which I could focus, but what I really want to highlight right now is evidence of his true commitment to the Wisconsin idea and his commitment to the public service mission of the land-grant universities. During his chancellorship in the 1990s, Chancellor Ward was a champion for reinvigorating the Wisconsin idea by building connections among and between the university, city, county, and state. He led the creation of the UW-Madison Cluster Hire Program aimed at attracting and retaining world-class faculty engaged in interdisciplinary scholarship and created the university's Technology Transfer Council in 1995. Perhaps most importantly to us, he charged a now historic committee in 1994, co-chaired by a current Dean of the College of Letters and Sciences, Gary Sandifer, and former Dean of Student, Mary Rouse, to prepare a proposal for the establishment of a service and service learning center on campus. He strongly supported the team effort of Mary Rouse and Don Gray from the UW Foundation, who sends his regrets that he couldn't be here today, supported the team to initiate a conversation with the Morgridges back in 1994 to first propose the idea of a university-wide service and service learning center. Chancellor Ward has long been an advocate for engaged scholarship, and in 1994 he was part of the CIC's Kellogg Commission that brought together 25 presidents and chancellors of major universities to prepare the report on the future of the land-grant university. It is only fitting that Chancellor Ward has rejoined our campus during our 100th anniversary of the Wisconsin idea, the 15th anniversary of the Morgridge Center. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor David Ward to talk about his vision for higher education.
Well, it's wonderful to be back, and wonderful to be back in a building like this. I've visited many times, but it's the first time I get to address you from this podium, and I've been delighted to see many others speak from this podium, but it really is glorious. The subject of really this afternoon is it can be both broad and narrow. I think its origins lie in the idea of making knowledge useful, not only in a purely practical sense, but also in being creative and creating a dialogue so that the application is not just sort of an empty movement from thought to action, but there's a contemplative element as well. So I think that the use of the word engagement now, rather than outreach or extension or a whole range of other words, we finally got our arms around what the idea is all about. And I think it's the idea of a complete cycle where it's not just application, it's not just feeling pragmatic, it's not just being utilitarian, it is the mental engagement that also goes on in becoming engaged. So engagement is really a state of mind, not just a transfer of knowledge. And I think there's much more understanding of that right now than there was certainly 20 years ago. When I think about that idea and this campus, I have to go back to the accreditation report of 1989. I was a brand new provost. The accreditation process had preceded my term, so I was handed this accreditation report. And although people think accreditation doesn't matter, if you take it seriously, it can matter a great deal. And this one did, because it was actually quite critical of UW-Madison. It actually told us what we claimed to be good at, what we could be good at, and why didn't we get good at it. I mean, that would be actually what I had read that report. And there were several areas that they felt we could do a better job at. One of them was the first 2 years of undergraduate education. Remember, 1989, the idea of interdisciplinarity. All of these things were thought of as important to us, and yet somehow or other they felt they didn't have the enterprise and the energy to pull them off. And one of them was what they called outreach, or the Wisconsin idea, or making knowledge, in a sense, relevant to the state and even further afield. So one of the critiques was, you got something here that's very special. You even call it, arrogantly as it were, the Wisconsin idea, but do you practice it to the degree that is appropriate? So during the 4 or 5 years following that accreditation, I think we took seriously all three of those criticisms. One was obviously doing a better job of undergraduate education. One was to promote interdisciplinarity. And then finally, actually the one that was most difficult to do, and that was to rethink outreach, extension, the Wisconsin idea in whatever that may mean. And the greatest challenge was ambiguity of meaning in the language itself. And the fact that we were in a shift from what had been overwhelmingly a agriculturally grounded extension movement to something which involved more I think, an educational attribute, and above all, it became something that needed to be integrated into the mainstream of how education occurred, that engagement was not something over here. And we began to think differently about teaching, research, public service, outreach, and thinking about how can we create a Venn diagram, and then if you've got very strong arms, can you push those Venn diagrams so they overlap more and more? And I think that was the kind of conceptual idea that lay behind development. We were also very lucky in that I think there were some passionate individuals who wanted to talk about this, and certainly I think Mary Rouse and Gary Sander, who should take some credit, in very quiet ways began to think how we might do this. But even more important, I think, was that it clearly needed a place, and it also needed a better sense of mission. And one of the local events that actually may have helped us think about mission with engagement as education, not just as reaching out, was the plight of the homeless in Madison, who were living by the heating vents of the Peterson building. And some of them were actually threatening people, employees in the building, as they were leaving. And rightly, the students said, as the police began to move them, this is not quite the right way to do this. So I, with the help of the Department of Social Work and city officials, we tried to see what could we do to intervene. Because what was clearly going on was the student idealism was the engagement. Exactly how that engagement would manifest itself in dealing with the homeless was the stretch. So the engagement was now there. They were alert to a need. And it was very interesting that the social services were very worried about getting the students involved. There were safety issues, but also the feeling that altruism by itself, without some sort of professional development, may cause more trouble than it was worth. And so that was one of the early occasions when student volunteers, where did they go? How could they go, in a sense, to move from their altruism to some sort of competency that would allow them to participate effectively with the agencies, or even in their own spontaneous efforts to be helpful. And in fact, the Department of Social Work did develop some short courses and so on. But that was sort of preceding this. And what it demonstrated to us was the need of a clearinghouse, there was a sort of sense of which how would we tailor and customize students to a particular kind of idealism and engagement, and above all, how could we cause groups? Because in the end, engagement, like all good education, is better off when it's done in a sense of a circular dialogue, multilateral dialogue, rather than in a bilateral dialogue, and that the education itself is bound up with the method by which the engagement is being experienced by several different individuals. And I think that was what began to develop as a thought for the Center for Service Learning. There were broader ideas about, which were perhaps more pragmatic, about internships. This was the beginning of the decade when there were worries about the employability of many degrees that had historically been liberal arts degrees, and individuals could quite easily move into professional training in their first job. Increasingly, the world was changing to a situation where some sort of multiple major, combining something that was more applied with something that was in the liberal arts, seemed to be almost necessary as one moves into a world in which jobs seem quite different than they did half a decade earlier. And I think that has been a prophecy that's worked out. It's a very tense world in terms of the fit between education and employment if you narrowly focus just on a discipline. So internships, I think, became one of the lead elements that as a student, through trying to support themselves, might in fact be promoting themselves following the degree. And how could you create an internship system that had educational value and wasn't in fact just simply a way of finding money in the summer? I think a variety of other things that came out of this were obviously alternative spring breaks. There were a whole series of creative ways in which engagement began to express itself. The problem is how did you put it all together in one place? And I think that's where philanthropy came together with a vision in a very propitious moment in the early 90s. And here, I think I've got to say that philanthropy also can be creative. That is, as one tries to see an opportunity to invest in something that has worthwhile purposes, on the whole, it tends to be very directed either at a particular position, a small group of people, a particular department. The great thing that happened here with this gift is it was available to all. Anybody who wished to be engaged, here was something that was at large. And I think donations that have what I call an at-large effect is something that philanthropy needs to think of, that instead of being in a sense of bilateral connection, it really is creating a context in which individuals can then reach either competitively or because of the relevance of them to what's being offered. Need-based aid is often offered in this way. It's a very general idea, but it's available broadly rather than just in one particular place. And I think this was a very unique way in which the gift that came from the Morgridges was very much at large. So it was a creative vision, but it was very much an at-large gift. Lots and lots of people benefited. It was not a narrow gift. It was a very broad gift. That, in many respects, is a very visionary kind of philanthropy. And finally, the other vision was there was an old building, which I come from Manchester, England, and red brick buildings are very familiar. And so when I saw the old red gym in Science Hall, I felt pretty, this is home, lots of red brick. And I went to a red brick university. The Brits call those northern British universities red brick universities because they're not sandstone and limestone like those odd things. Well, the Oxford and Cambridge, I think they're called. They have. So those of us who went to these northern British universities, red brick was familiar. And there was the old red gym or the armory. Being a historian, I actually thought of it as the armory first. Later, I realized it really was the old red gym to most students. But this was a building in disrepair. And to revitalize a building as part of this image through philanthropy, imagine you can see the creativity of this philanthropy. Simultaneously, lots of good things are happening. Rehabilitation of a building that had symbolic meaning, but desperately needed to be remodeled creatively. An at-large gift, lots of people proving to be beneficial, and on the running edge of a development of outreach into engagement. I became aware of this through my membership of the Kellogg Commission on the future of land-grant institutions because the land grant is often thought of as the origins of this connectivity between university and society, between innovation and application, obviously hybrid crops and farmers. And what this Kellogg review was about, it's changing what used to be traditional outreach or extension. And I was really quite pleased to recognize that what we were just doing was the moving edge, that what was being described by the Kellogg Commission as the virtue of the, quote, new extension, the new outreach, engagement, we were in fact trying to practice. The big problem, of course, was how to interdigitate that development with undergraduate curriculum with for-credit activity. And that still remains one of the how to mainstream as distinct from it being a supplement to what currently goes on. And I think that's what's beginning to happen, a rich debate about that connection. It cannot be off there, it cannot be a moon, it cannot be a sort of satellite. In some ways, all students need to encounter some aspect of engagement, and some engagement needs to bear the legitimacy of credits. This is hard to do, but I think that's where we have to go. Finally, the other big change, I think, which makes the Wisconsin idea perhaps a little obsolete, is that at the time, the Wisconsin idea of the boundaries of the university being the boundaries of the state is no longer big enough for us. And so we assume that the metaphor has been scaled up, that the boundaries of the nation, or I think that we are a global institution. And so what used to be done at a small scale in a very immediate way is now done globally. And I think we can accept that the Wisconsin idea really is no longer narrowly serving Wisconsin. The Wisconsin idea is embedded now in a global reach, not just in a Wisconsin reach. And I'm delighted to hear of so many ways in which our engagement now is globalized, and the connectivity with international studies and a variety of international projects, very dear to my heart, are now part of that. And so what has now emerged, I think, is something that perhaps is on the cusp of establishing itself at a different scale, at a global scale, as carrying engagement as a form of education that is more integrated into the activity of the learning process. We all now know that sitting in a room listening to a lecture is not necessarily the best way to learn anymore. It is out of the dialogue, having obtained the material in some personal, direct way, either from a computer or iPad or whatever. We keep hearing that that's the best way to learn. Well, engagement is always that way. There has always been this sense of a multilateral engagement that is as much as important to the developing brain as it is to the activity which creates the outcome. So I am delighted to say that in the last 15 years, this center and this university has probably paralleled the development of engagement from the redefinition of outreach to engagement as part and parcel of the early 90s, creating a space in which people can take advantage of the opportunities for engagement, and that now we're in our 15th year, we're probably at the moment where we in fact may have something that we can mainstream back into instruction, that engagement may be a metaphor for a creative form of instruction, that we've raised the scale from a state to global. And finally, I think that the idea of teamwork or group work, which in some ways universities are not very good at. We're actually very cellular, very individualistic in how we put ourselves together. And in some ways, some of our breakthroughs in research and in teaching are when it becomes team-like, group-like. Engagement has always been that way. And so, in a sense, we may be on the cusp of a mainstreaming of an idea which many people think narrowly as simply the university being practical and utilitarian and having an effect on the world economically or socially around them. But it is equally important pedagogically because it is, in so many respects, the core of the educational experience itself. That is the end of the sermon. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Ward. I think that you nailed a number of things right on the head, and I'm excited to hear about the enthusiasm about this new scholarship of engagement. Also excited to say that this is something on campus that is being talked a lot about, and in fact, I think the rest of this year during the centennial celebration, you'll be seeing other events happen and more discussions, even all the way up to the divisional committees, to talk about how we can do a better job on our campus of rewarding pre-tenure faculty, post-tenure faculty for their engaged scholarship in all forms. So it is my distinct pleasure now to introduce John and Tasha Morgridge as our next speakers to share with us their vision for the center, reflect on their own civic engagement ideals, and their thoughts on the role of higher education in preparing students to become engaged citizens and leaders of the future. It's difficult for me to express the gratitude that all of us feel for both Tasha and John's generosity in establishing the Morgridge Center for Public Service. Their generous endowment in 1984 has ensured that the center has both operating funds and a home in the renovated historic Red Gym and Armory. Over the past 15 years, the center has built upon the rich tradition of service as captured by the Wisconsin idea and has played a vital role in educating students, preparing them to fulfill their social and civic obligations as future citizens and leaders. Tasha and John have continued to support and invest in the Morgridge Center, and in 2009 established the 5-year, $5 million Morgridge Challenge Match to encourage faculty and staff to bring new funding to the university to support service learning, and community-based research. This generous gift has helped the center continue to grow its endowment and its programs, and as it has grown in stature, visibility, and impact. As a 1955 graduate of the School of Education, Tasha has always had a passion for learning, teaching, and service. Although retired from her early career as a teacher, I understand that she continues to volunteer as a tutor for young school children near her home in Northern California. As a 1955 graduate of the School of Business, John continues to advance his vision for bringing community and the campus together through technology and business in many ways. And I think here is a perfect example, being in this facility, of John and Tasha's vision together of how they've brought all of us together. John and Tasha's investment in the center has built a bridge between community and campus, linking town and gown, allowing students, staff, faculty, and community partners to truly experience the Wisconsin idea. Please join me in welcoming John and Tasha Morgridge.
Often a copied idea is better than an original idea. Certainly, Tasha and I have used that strategy often. As a businessman, you know, I had a kind of a policy that there were 3 levels of successful programs. There were successful programs that happened without your interference, which you subsequently took credit for. Most of those are 100% successful. The second set, which has a slightly higher risk, are copy programs. You observe something that works and you say, you know, we could probably duplicate that. And then a third is the most risky one, where you actually conceive a new or very different idea. Those tend to be high risk, and CEOs usually can, other than perhaps age, come to their demise on those kinds of undertakings. Not that you shouldn't do them, it's just that they're very high risk. The majority of the programs that we've done here at Wisconsin have been copy programs. Programs that we have observed somewhere else, many at Stanford, and have brought here. Now, the advantage of those is that they've already worked through a lot of the potential screening of failure, so that you start on a basis that's more secure. The second is that you can address and correct, perhaps, mistakes that the initial round made that you can improve upon and implement slightly differently. There's also a great advantage is if you take that idea and do it somewhere else, because then people actually think it's an original idea. And you get credit for an original idea when actually you're just copying some idea that's been implemented somewhere else. All of those certainly play into the things that we've enjoyed doing here in Wisconsin. There are other ingredients that are important, and David touched on some of them. Certainly timing and the climate of the situation is very important. It's also important that you find the right resources, or that the right resources exist for it. And that was true. Some of the names have been mentioned of the people that were here who not only had part of this vision or this vision, but were willing to invest in it and be part of it going forward. You know, it's not just a coincidence that at the time that we made this gift that that Tasha was chair of the Haas Center at Stanford. All of that played into our decision to go ahead and do this. Oh, and yes, last, the importance of infrastructure. There's a lot of infrastructure in a university, and the key is to find ways to capitalize off of what already exists and leverage that as a resource. And if you look at our investments here at Madison, many of them have that quality that we're leveraging off of that the in-being resource and infrastructure. As was mentioned, we graduated in the 50s, it was a time when the campus wasn't liberal, it was communist. So it's actually made quite a bit of progress since then. I now understand a recent survey said we're liberal. But when I was a kid coming here, it was red. It was red. And to David's point, it was the boundaries of the state, or the boundaries of the universities, or the boundaries of the state. And that with good measure, looking back on the history of the land grants and the focus of the land grants, the agricultural environment that this was a part of. So that was understandable. Tasha's parents actually thought the United States was the boundaries, that the state of Wisconsin were the boundaries of the United States. And it took them, they made very few trips across the border. So that was the mindset. And for us students, an international trip was the annual drive to Florida, where people spoke a version of our language, but not identically the same. And some of the food was kind of funny. And so that was our international experience. So much has changed since then, where now a quarter of our undergraduates, I guess, make a overseas trip. So I think it is fitting at this point to take on this new mantra of that Wisconsin is without borders, and that the borders extend not only to Madison, not only to Milwaukee maybe, but actually throughout the world. So it's a great vision, and one that I look forward to being part of going forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to my wife.
It's very interesting. John and I did not compare notes, but there's a great similarity. He just gave part of my speech, and I think it has to do with...
You told me to go first.
I did, What a mistake. I think it has something to do with the fact that we have now been married for 56 years and together for about 60. And I think there's something about our brains that our brains seem to be pretty much in parallel. So I hope I know also that one teaching technique that works very, very well is repetition. So here we go. My speech. It's true, we grew up in Wisconsin, and we grew up in the 50s. And that was a very, very different time, as has been mentioned. The world was really much smaller, partly because the communications that were available then were very different. You couldn't tweet and Twitter and Skype and all that stuff and find out. There wasn't even television. So you couldn't find out what was going on across the world and even across the state. So it was a very, very, very different time. And it was also a time when, as mentioned, where the borders of the university were the borders of Wisconsin, but they were also my personal borders. I grew up in Wauwatosa, and that was kind of my universe. The borders of Wisconsin basically were the borders of my existence, as John had mentioned. We did, when I was a teenager, my family took a very big adventure, and we went out west. And that was the first time I think I had taken a trip out of the state. Now, it was also a different time for guys and for girls. When John was younger and in high school, high school and college, he and his buddies would get into old jalopies that barely made it down the driveway and take a trip across the country. Or they would pack their backpacks and a couple cans of Dinty Moore stew and head out in a canoe up in the Boundary Waters. My sister and I, when I was 18, were permitted to get into my parents' car and drive to the Dells and stay overnight. Ooh, it was exciting. But that was then, and this is now, and a lot has changed in between. In between, John and I have traveled around the world. We've been to all of the Paris and the London and the various places like that. But we've also been to many, many third world countries. And we have seen what the world is like. We've seen the United States, a lot of it on a bicycle. And when you are on a bicycle, you learn a lot about your country. So we've learned a lot about our country, we've learned a lot about the world, and we've certainly changed in the way that we look at the world. And so Wisconsin and Wauwatosa are no longer boundaries for me or for us, and certainly not for you in listening to your speeches and to hearing about your poster presentations. So now Wisconsin does have international borders, and it is a responsibility of those students and professors and teachers and everybody in this state to make sure they learn about the world and what it has to offer. And the programs that you are doing are an amazing way to involve yourselves on a personal level. So I congratulate you on that. Also, the other part about being a citizen of the world is that you are a citizen of this country. You are representing this country, and in so doing, you're learning about yourself as a citizen. And I hope you, as involved citizens, will also pay attention to the way this country is run. I hope you will be voters. I hope you will be involved. Not necessarily out picketing up at the Capitol, but to be involved in your own way, however you're comfortable with that. So I thank you for that. Because another thing you have to do all of those things is to move out of your comfort zone. You have to move out of your own Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. You have to get out into the world and be in a place that's unfamiliar, where, as John says, where the food is a little different and the people speak a little different. And you have to know about those people, and you have to learn about those people, and in so doing, you learn about yourself. So, I'm delighted that we have the Wisconsin Without Borders, and I thank you for the part in which you play in that. And now I'd like to take just a minute. I know that Nancy is going to introduce Bob and Sarah Rothschild, but I want to say a few words first. Can you see them sitting there nervously in their chair? They are actually good examples of a world without borders. They are living that, and you will hear about that in their talk. First of all, Bob and Sarah have been good friends for about 10 years now. And they aren't just friends, they are very special friends to us. They are friends with whom we share values. They are friends with whom we share laughs. We are friends with whom we enjoy dinners and all kinds of things. And they are also very fearless travelers. They have done a number of safaris on the Kalahari, and they have managed to get between 2 prides of lions on one of their excursions. But they have not yet been eaten. Therefore, John and I and Mary and Carl Gulbranson are being taken along in March as bait. So we are going to Botswana with them to enjoy not only the Kalahari, but also their libraries. So thank you. And Nancy, you can do the official.
Thank you, Tasha and John.